Florida defensive tackle Gervon Dexter is a project for sure for the Chicago Bears. But if they can help him reach his full potential, there could be something really special in the second round pick.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We really appreciate our everydayers tuning in 5 days a week for all of our Locked On Bears episodes. And if you've been tuning in, you're getting to know these Bears draft prospects even better. We continue that today with Gervon Dexter, going deep with Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators, going to join us on the podcast today, our local expert on the Florida Gators football team. We'll learn more about Dexter's recruitment to Florida and the expectations early on, the trajectory as he went through his Florida career, and then, of course, how things will project to the NFL and the sort of like range of outcomes for him in his career. There's definitely a lot of work to be done, definitely a project, but a lot to like, and you can see why, at the same time, the Bears made him the 53rd overall pick. After Brandon, we'll hear from Bears general manager Ryan Poles and go in a little bit more depth as to why Dexter's production wasn't quite as high at Florida as you would have liked it to be for a second-round pick. But let's start by getting to know the prospect a little bit better by getting to know one of our other podcast hosts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Joining us now is Brandon Olsen, host of Locked On Gators here on the Locked On Podcast Network. He also covers the New York Giants over at Giants Country through the Sports Illustrated Network. Brandon, first of all, how was draft day for you? I mean, obviously Anthony Richardson at the top, but not a bad weekend for Florida overall, right?
Yeah, for a team that had 6 wins to get 6 players drafted is pretty great there. Couple surprises, but for the most part, I was happy. I was stoked to see AR get drafted 4th too.
Well, I guess on the topic of surprises, like I was going to start there with Gervon Dexter. You know, when the season for Florida ended last season, or whenever he declared for the draft, where did you sort of expect he might go? And was the Bears at 53 a surprise to you that as far as the range?
I thought he'd be a 2nd or 3rd round pick just because he's so physically gifted. He's so big and so athletic for his size that you kind of knew an NFL team was going to fall in love with him at some point. So 2nd or 3rd round was kind of where I thought he'd go. I will say something he did pre-draft when he made his like draft announcement that I thought was amazing because I was sure it wasn't happening, was he opted in to play in the bowl game, and he was like the only Gators draft prospect that opted in, and that was just awesome to see from him, where he was just like, you know what, I'm going to go out on a high note. And for me, I'm not one that cares about whether or not people play in the bowl game, but I just thought it was awesome because I did not expect him to.
Yeah, what do you think that was about? Like, do you think it's about a connection with the coaching staff there? Like, is it? Do you think it speaks to I don't know, like character and place in the locker room? Like, why do you think he made that decision while no one else did?
I think he just wanted to wear that orange and blue one last time for the Gators, which now he gets to wear different shades of orange and blue. But I think he just wanted to wear that Gators orange and blue one last time. You know, you never get the chance again. It's not like he was a Senior Bowl eligible player that would have been able to wear the helmet again. So I think for him, he was like, I just want to end on a high note. And while the game was awful, it was a very nice moment just to see him strap up one last time for the Gators. And I mean, that's the school that he's loved since he was a kid. So I think he just wanted to end it right.
Yeah, he's a Florida native, right? And I remember a pretty highly touted recruit coming in, like number 1 in the state. What do you remember about that process and about like him coming to campus and then sort of the expectations of him in that draft or in that recruiting class?
Expectations were incredibly high for Gervon as a Florida Gator because he is one of Florida's highest ranked commits of all time. He was just I think in his class, he was like 10th or 15th just in that year, but he's one of Florida's highest ranked commits of all time. So expectations were high for him. And he even said it when he was when he committed. He was just like, look, I want to win championships for the Florida Gators. Like, that's what I want to do. Obviously, that one didn't work out the way that he was hoping it would work out. But yeah, it was a huge recruitment for Gervon, but it was kind of one of those times where it happens a lot in the state of Florida or in any state where you go, oh, like he's probably going to go to the school that's close to him. He's been a fan of his entire life. And for Florida, luckily, Gervon ended up picking the Gators.
How do you feel like his trajectory across the 3 years at Florida went in terms of like those expectations? Because I mean, like when you're drafted in the second round, it's hard to feel like he was a disappointment, but certainly the production numbers might not match exactly where you thought with a recruit that high. So how do you feel like especially like the fan base when you think of like that guy coming in and then over time, did he feel like is disappointment too strong of a word, or how would you describe that?
I don't think disappointment's too strong of a word. I'm someone who I've been kind of rough on Gervon this past year because when he was a complete depth piece in 2020, it was like, okay, like he's a great athlete, but he's young and we've got a solid defensive line right now. 2021, he rotated in, he made some big plays as a pass rusher. And the entire story from 2021 to 2022 was, man, once he's now a starter and he's going to be getting those starter snaps, he's going to destroy everybody. One of the best pass rushers in the SEC. All this hype, and then it kind of just fizzled in 2022. And it is disappointing. I don't think disappointment is being too harsh with it because he's someone who had incredibly high expectations, and he wasn't a complete like he wasn't a loser in Florida, but the expectation was that you were going to be a world eater on this defensive line, and he wasn't even the best player on the defensive line in 2022. So I think that's, yes, it's a disappointment, but it wasn't a complete failure of a college career.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Built Bar, the world's best tasting protein bars. I love Built Bars. I eat one every single day because they taste delicious, but they're also good for you. Every Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate. They're soft, they're easy to chew. They taste like candy bars, but somehow they're also low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. We're talking 17 grams of protein for only 3 or 4 grams of sugar and 130 calories. You can't find another protein bar product like this anywhere on the market. That's why I eat them every single day. It really is an important part. It's a sweet treat that I get to have without feeling any guilt, and it can help me work towards my own health goals. You can get a bunch of great flavors of Built Bars anytime at Built.com, or you can get them even faster in person at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. If you head into Walmart over by the pharmacy section, they got the protein bars there. You can pick up a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream bar, the double chocolate bar, or the coconut puffs. If you got a Sam's Club in your area, you can head into that store and get a 13-bar box of 2 of my all-time favorite flavors, Brownie Batter Puff and the Churro Puffs. Try them for yourself there or at Built.com and thank me later. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the other defensive line talent. I feel like so often when we talk about D-line, we want to focus on one guy, but if you got no one else, then you're getting all the attention, or if you got other really good players, then you're getting less of the attention and should perform better. How would you sort of assess over time the level of talent around him and how much responsibility was on his shoulders to be the guy to get the attention of the opposing offensive line?
Yeah, he definitely got the short end of the stick in 2022 with that, where 2021 there was talent all around him. You had Zachary Carter was probably the big name on the defensive line with Brandon Cox, and then in 2022, Brandon Cox gets dismissed from the team. Zachary Carter is gone. There's kind of no interior defensive line depth, so Gervon Dexter was forced to play. I think he played the most snaps of any defensive tackle in the SEC last year, and it wasn't a close margin. So he had to play way more snaps than he should have. But at the same time, I do feel like, and my main complaint with him all year was I felt like it was too often where you'd see him kind of taking it easy out there. And at that point, I don't know about you, I'd rather be like, hey, man, like if you're a defensive player and you're like, hey, I'm too gassed to go full, then just sub yourself out or something. Like take yourself out if you're going to hurt the team. So that was my biggest complaint with Gervon, was just, it just didn't seem like he was a full go the entire time out there. And look, Princely Umanmielen, who you're going to hear plenty of, is next year's draft. He's a fantastic football player, but he's not going to command the attention that Gervon Dexter did. And so Gervon kind of got the short end of the stick with talent surrounding him and talent behind him. But I still think that his faults are his faults, regardless of that.
Sure. We're talking with Brandon Olsen here from Locked On Gators. And Brandon, how much do you think the transition there from Dan Mullen, who recruited him, to Billy Napier? I don't know exactly how much. It seems like a lot changed, but I don't know how much changed. How does that? How do you think, if any way, that affected the defense as a whole, but also then Dexter in the middle of it?
I think with Gervon Dexter, a lot of it changed from 2021 to 2022 in more ways than just Dan Mullen and Todd Grantham got fired and Billy Napier and Sean Spencer got hired, because that was also just a complete turning point for Gervon Dexter's life. He had his first kid right in that offseason as well. So him having that first kid and becoming a father, like an actual father there at such a young age, plus Billy Napier coming in and saying, hey, like, we have high expectations of you as a player, as a person, and as a leader. That's a lot to be thrown on him. And then I hate that people use the excuse like, oh, he changed from defensive tackle to defensive end in 2021 to 2022. Played the same spot. It was still a 3-tech. It was just you called him a different position. But I think that he was asked to do a lot more in 2022 than he was ever really asked to do in 2021. He was kind of just allowed to pin his ears back and just get going in 2021 under Todd Grantham, and he wasn't given that same exact assignment in 2022. I mean, it was just a creative defense up front. I do think Sean Spencer helped him develop a little bit as an actual like hand fighter along the defensive line. But yeah, it was a huge change for Gervon. There's no doubt about that. A lot of it was personal, and I guess we'll say professional. But yeah, it was a massive, massive change for him. And I think that he stepped up in some areas and not necessarily others.
It strikes me that a 6 foot, almost 6'6", I think 310, 315-pound defensive tackle was playing like the 3 technique and even kicking out to end. Did they have a big nose tackle that was even bigger than him, or why was he at that spot and not just, in the very middle playing that true, like, over the center nose?
Oh, he was playing 3-tech because last year Florida had Desmond Watson at nose tackle, who is 6'4", 450 pounds. so you had Big Des at the nose, and yeah, that kind of had Gervon at 3-tech. But even in 2022, Gervon played 3-tech more than anything else. In 2021, with TJ Slayton, who's over with the Packers now. Sorry to bring them up on the show, but Gervon Dexter was still a 3-tech there. That's just where they used him. I think it was more of a way to get him into probably less double teams on the defensive line and allow him to shoot gaps more often. But yeah, I think that a big reason for him playing 3-tech last year was the 450-pound mountain in the middle of the line.
For Dexter, how much do you think of the success they did have was just about him being bigger, stronger, and faster than opponents? I mean, obviously SEC opponents are no slouches, but translating the NFL, everyone's going to be big, fast, and strong. I know we know already that he needs technique development, but I guess how much do you think he relied on those physical traits to get the production that he did have in college?
A ton of it was just just being able to accelerate past these offensive linemen. Like, his best games were against not bad teams, but not the best offensive lines in the SEC. You look at Missouri, and South Carolina was a good game for him as well. But then you look at when he went against elite talent like Georgia, where they have freaks all along the offensive line, and he just wasn't as dominant because he couldn't just out athlete offensive linemen. And that was kind of the calling card for him throughout his entire career, was that I can just burst by this offensive line before they can really get a good hand on me. And then I get to make my plays that way.
What do you think are realistic expectations for him in the NFL? I think we can all say patience will be required. He's not just going to come in and be a superstar or anything right away. But I don't know, like, how it feels like there's a high ceiling there, but I guess it's about the probability of being able to hit that ceiling. I guess where do you sort of see the range of outcomes for Dexter at the pros?
I think his ceiling is genuinely like Pro Bowl, all pro caliber interior defensive lineman. Like, you could look at I hate to make this comp because I feel like it's been made a million times, and just because like he fits athletically, like you can look at like a Chris Jones style defensive lineman, and that can be Gervon Dexter. But also, if he doesn't develop the way that he should, you're probably looking at a tail end of your defensive line rotation there with him. That's kind of like, hey man, you're just a pass rushing specialist, I guess now, and we're just gonna hope that you can make a play here on third down. So I think for Gervon, there's a wide range for him because he's just so athletic and relatively raw right now. But if you can get just simple things right with him, like if you can get him to react a little bit quicker to the snap, then you're already making him so much better than he already is.
Well, Brandon, you coming on the podcast has made it so much better than it already was. Really appreciate you coming on with us. Let everybody know where they can find your work, especially if they want to go back and see any Florida Gator stuff or coverage you've done in the past on Gervon Dexter.
Yeah, you can find it on Locked On Gators 5 times a week minimum at this point. But Locked On Gators and Giants Country with SI.com has some Gator stuff there too.
And he's on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Brandon, really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators for that breakdown and sharing his local expertise on the Florida Gators program, and Gervon Dexter. And I want to turn now to the Chicago Bears general manager, Ryan Poles. He was asked after the draft about Gervon Dexter's production, and I thought he gave an interesting and thoughtful answer that I want to dive into a little bit deeper about some of these ideas of looking at what you do in college, what you're asked to do in college, and what traits you have to determine what you might be capable of doing more of in the NFL, and how that process works, and what sort of then makes it the chances that Dexter is able to do so, because there is clearly a lot of projection here, but you can certainly see the allure as Brandon was getting at with us, and also you can see the risk involved with that process when a guy hasn't been productive before and you're asking him to do more or better or different in the NFL than perhaps he was in college. It's never a sure thing. But let's start with the Bears general manager, Ryan Poles, because I thought he really, not to say that he like alleviates the concerns, but he at least illuminated the thought process there as to, okay, why are the Bears okay with a prospect like this that's got a bunch of great athletic traits that hasn't had the production that you like from college going into the pros?
When you look at the Dexter and Pickens and their production, I know interior D linemen don't necessarily have high production in college. Yep. What do you look at with that, and like how do you balance what you like at them on tape and the fact that numbers might not be eye-popping?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the first projects I had way back in the day was for Dontario Poe. I think he had 2 sacks, and we were contemplating taking him at 9 or 10, and just did a study and watched all of the plays and really, try to see how did he affect the game. Punch in the pocket, eating up 2 blocks so other guys could run free. So that goes into play. Like I said, there's a level of a multiplier where they can help other people as well, free other individuals up to make plays. So those guys had those pieces. And then the other thing, just kind of coming up through the ranks, is for big guys, grade the flashes. Grade the flashes. You're good.
Sorry.
Yeah.
With Dexter and like the pressure numbers for him over the last 2 seasons from the 3 technique spot, and not necessarily seeing that translate to sack numbers.
Yeah.
When you are looking at a prospect like that, what tells you and your scouts and the coaching staff, hey, we can transfer that to actual production where you're getting after the quarterback? And I know pressures are part of that, but like, does that matter to you?
It does. So you're kind of piecing it together. Foot speed, ability to get skinny, acceleration of burst to finish, the toolbox and your pass rush skills. Those go into it, and then what does he has to do at his school? So for Dexter, a little bit more of a square stance, read and mirror. When that's the case, you're not really on your toes and penetrating, get up the field. So you got to piece those things together, and that can help you show where the upside is and how in our system it can be even better in terms of how they affect the quarterback.
I want to go in a little more on what Poles is saying there about exactly the role Dexter was being asked to play at Florida, this sort of like read and react type responsibility. So when we think about the Bears defensive line this year and in the past with a 4-man front like this, we think of like, especially in passing situations, right? On the snap, you're trying to get into the backfield as quick as possible, right? You're trying to be off the ball as quick as possible, get past the guy in front of you as quick as possible. The 3 technique spot that Dexter played, you're basically like on the outside shoulder of the guard. So you're trying to knife into that gap, usually between the guard and the tackle. Of course, sometimes you move inside and you have other responsibilities, but like if we're oversimplifying it here, right? On the snap, you're trying to get past the outside shoulder of the guard and get past to the quarterback, generally speaking. The way Florida used Dexter is not exactly always in that way. Some snaps, yes, he was being asked to do so. It's not as though he was never, penetrating to try and get after the quarterback. But this idea of like being asked to read and react is a schematic, an intentional schematic choice at times by the Florida defensive coordinators to, rely on, certainly, like, it's not that all 4 linemen aren't trying to penetrate, and you still are asking him to try it. I mean, he's still trying to beat his block. It's not that he's just standing there like a QB spy, but it's more about prioritizing, like, hey, we need to stay on top of the pocket because the edge rushers are going to collapse down. And so if the edge rushers are squeezing in from the sides, if you get too caught up trying to go upfield, then no one is there to contain the quarterback if the quarterback wants to leave the pocket. So Dexter's being asked to sort of read and react a little bit more so over the top and not always be knifing in there to get into the backfield. Whereas in the Bears scheme, the 3 technique pass rusher is a lot more of a penetrator, a lot more trying to be more disruptive on the inside. The nose tackle sometimes has to play more of the read and react role in that regard in pass rushing situations. So you can see where, okay, if you take a big, strong, long, athletic freak of a defensive tackle and say, okay, instead of having to read and react a little bit, and this is true in the running game as well, right? Sometimes you're not always trying to get right into the backfield to make the tackle for a loss, but you're waiting to see a little bit where the running back is going to go, then shed your block and get to the ball carrier. Like that's a big reason why he didn't have very many tackles for loss either. He had a ton of tackles, you might look. Like his tackle stats are among the most total tackles in this draft class. But not a lot of those were tackles for loss in the backfield because he wasn't being asked to just get into the backfield, but more like, let's see where the running back is going to go and then try and get off your block and make the tackle. Then it just ends up being 2 or 3 or 4 yards downfield as opposed to behind the line of scrimmage there. But you can see where if you take someone that you feel like has these kind of physical tools, the speed to presume, like he ran a fast 40-yard dash and did well at the combine, like for his size, he's got some of those types of traits. So you feel like, okay, then if we ask him to play faster, he should be able to take the physical tools and now do something slightly different with them than what he was doing his last year at Florida to be able to do that more effectively. And then when you add in the length and the strength, if you can teach him better technique that was still very raw as a part of his developmental process here, he could then put all of those pieces together to be, like Brandon mentioned, like a Chris Jones type of Pro Bowl caliber defensive lineman. The problem is it is a big if. They were expecting those developments to go faster in college, to start to make more of that progress earlier on. It's also worth keeping in mind, he didn't start playing football till his junior year of high school. He was a basketball guy through and through. So he is, compared to other players that have been playing football since Pee Wee, Pop Warner, and maybe not at that size and defensive line all the time, but, players who are around the game a little bit more and get more experience and just have more under their belt. Like, there's something to be said about him being newer at the sport as well. But you see the intrigue. You see how it could work. Like, all of the pieces are there. It's just about the Bears being able to put them together, and Dexter being an equal partner in that, putting it together, putting in the work that's going to be necessary, the dedication, the learning, the mental processing. Like, there's a lot involved in all of that coming together. But if it does, you've got something there. It's a big if. And generally speaking, quite often it doesn't work. It's not a sure thing that, just because he's got the pieces and you feel like you have a good coaching staff that can coach him up, doesn't mean it's going to happen. But is it worth the risk there at the 53rd overall pick? Certainly Ryan Poles absolutely believes so, and especially when you get a couple other young defensive linemen in there to hedge a little bit in case one of them doesn't pan out. Plus you got veterans on the roster as well. So it's going to be fun to see what Gervon Dexter's able to do. Maybe we need to lower our expectations for this year as he continues to learn, but certainly years 2 through 4 and perhaps beyond in Chicago. You can be sure we'll keep tabs on Dexter's development all throughout the process here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts or on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. I'm still locking it in for sure, but I'm pretty sure Alex Dono from Locked On Miami Hurricanes, is going to join us on tomorrow's podcast to talk about Tyreek Stevenson. Again, I think we're still nailing down a time, but I got a thumbs up as like should work. And so I don't want to make false promises here, but pretty sure tomorrow we'll be Locked On Canes to learn more about Tyreek Stevenson as we go through all of these Bears draft prospects. So come on back, make Locked On Bears your first listen again tomorrow and every single day. Yesterday we heard from Locked On Vols, Eric Kane, about Darnell Wright and his college process. We're going through these prospects, and hopefully you're learning a lot along the way. And hopefully each and every time we learn more about these Bears players, it gives you another opportunity to bear down.